Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Lindsay and this is Waldorf Inspired Roots. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing why we chose to homeschool and also sharing my 15-year-old son's educational journey from the beginning until now. So if you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I would love to hear questions and feedback in the comment section below. So my oldest son, his name is Mikey or Michael, and he is now 15 and he's finishing up his freshman year in homeschool high school. And so he began his academic career back when he was first born, really. So as all kids begin learning from birth, but what I mean by that is that I ran an in-home preschool, similar to what I do now with my toddler, but the way I ran it was a lot different when he was little. So I have a history or whatnot in working for preschools. I had worked for several beginning in high school and going all the way up until my son was born. And I knew from working in preschools that when he was born, I decided I didn't want him to go to preschool. Go figure. I thought that all the preschools that I worked for were good and I did enjoy it, but I really wanted to be the one teaching my son, and I really wanted to be the one who was actively part of his everyday learning and growing, and I didn't want to miss anything. So I opened up an in-home preschool and he did very well, but just a little tiny history. I won't go into it in this video, or I'm not sure when or if I'll get into the full story, but I was 21 and I got a phone call from Child Protective Services asking if I would be willing to be a kinship foster for my sister's son. And my sister, she hadn't had him yet, but she has her own struggles and challenges and things. And no one in my family had really seen her or talked to her in quite a while. And so that was the first time that I kind of found out that she was expecting, and I didn't really know all of what was going on. I was 21 years old and I was single, and I had a lot of experience with kids, and I was over the moon excited to have the opportunity to, offer the best care I could to my son while my sister worked through her challenges. And unfortunately, she didn't get herself to a place where she was able to, care for her son. And so I ended up adopting, and that is my oldest son. So I adopted as a single mom, and I've had him since day one. I've had him since he was born. But he was unfortunately born with some chemical dependencies, and that's where some of his struggles and his delays and things sort of stem from. And so as he got older, we realized he had a speech delay. The specific kind is called a vocabulary recall delay, which means, for example, when he was little, if I laid out all the, a bunch of flashcards that we had worked on and talked about of colors, for example, and I said, Mikey, point to red, point to blue, point to whatever. He could point to the ones that we had gone over and that, I was confident that he knew he could point to it and get them right 100% of the time. But if I laid out one card and said, Mikey, what color is this? He couldn't bring it back. So it was kind of always like he was the type of kid that had a word on the tip of his tongue, and he just really struggled to hold on to and learn and be able to use new vocabulary. Now, I worked with him, and then he also went through Nevada's early intervention, and they, gave him some speech services. He also had some sensory issues, so he was doing some occupational therapy. And a lot of those things really helped, in addition to me just really trying to pay attention to how they were working with him, and then just doing it, at home literally as much as possible. And he started to really pick up on some things. He also had a tongue tie. We had to get his tongue clipped, and I believe he had a lip tie as well. I can't remember, it was a long time ago, but yeah, tongue tie and a lip tie. And so once they clipped those, his speech did start to pick up a little bit more too. So he had the compounding factors of tongue and lip tie in addition to the vocabulary recall delay. So, but yeah, he really started to flourish around the age of 3. And that's just after I really started noticing a huge leap for him. He was approved through Nevada Early Intervention to go into the preschool program at our local public school, which was for children with IEPs, which stands for Individualized Education Plan. And so he went into the public school system at the age of 3. So for the ages of 3 and 4, he did that. Now, when he was 5, he did go into kindergarten, and he struggled because of his vocabulary recall delay. He really struggled with learning the letters and the letter sounds and learning how to read. So by the end of kindergarten, he was pretty well getting the alphabet and letter sounds, but he was nowhere near putting them together to form CVC words or sight words or anything like that. He just wasn't there. And so I was very strongly encouraged to hold him back, which I went with their suggestion because I figured that they knew best. And even now, I don't know that that was the wrong move or the right move. I'm still undecided, I guess, but we did end up, I did end up holding him back. And so he did kindergarten twice, and by the end of his 2nd year of kindergarten, he definitely was more on his way to reading. He was still considered behind, but we did move him on to 1st grade. And he has had between kindergarten and 5th, which is when we pulled him, and I'll get into that in a minute. He had some really great teachers, and he had some not so great teachers. But the ones who were really great, his 2nd grade teacher was by far my favorite of his teachers. Really, really made strides. But then when he would have a teacher during a year that maybe wasn't so great, like his 3rd grade teacher was terrible, unfortunately, and I was trying to advocate for him to change classes, but I was very young and I didn't know what rights I had with that, and they kept telling me that they couldn't do that, although I know now that, that's untrue. But his 3rd grade teacher really got him into a mindset where he didn't like school, didn't look forward to going to school, didn't want to be anywhere near school. And that was also the year that he had a bully. And the bully would pick on him when nobody was around, particularly on the playground, and picked fights with him. And I think across America this is true. If you are involved in a fight at school, you get suspended as well as the person who instigated it. It doesn't matter if you start the fight or if you defend yourself. If you are involved in a fight, you also get suspended. And so my son was getting suspended for literally being involved in a fight, not even necessarily defending himself, but for, blocking attacks or, swiping, a punch away, for things where he literally was not even fighting back, but he was defending himself in a very non-confrontational way, literally blocking, not even, defending as far as punching back or anything. But he got suspended in his 3rd grade year, I think 3 or 4 times, and they would suspend him for 1 to 3 days each time, and it was the same kid every time. And it was really hard to see him not only have a teacher that he was struggling to connect with or to learn from, because of after going to parent-teacher conferences, she was a very negative teacher and would always tell me in a very harsh way, these are the things that your child is not getting and not understanding, and almost like angry that he just wasn't. And I'm just like, whoa, calm down. Like, even during parent-teacher conferences, I felt like she was in attack mode or something, and very, very negative space. And it put him in a negative space, and accompanied with the bully issue that we had that year, he just really started to not enjoy school and not want to go. And so that was heartbreaking to me. And then 4th grade, we got lucky and he got a amazing teacher. And when I say we, I mean him. He got an amazing teacher. And so he had a much better year, but every year that he would have a not so great teacher, I feel like it would set him back so far that he was always, you know, finally getting caught up, and then he'd have a terrible teacher, and then he'd get caught up, and then he'd have a terrible teacher, or, you know, along those lines. And so I just felt like it was constantly a struggle. His grades were always a struggle, and there was just a lot going on. So I had been contemplating, I just kept having this thought in my head that I knew I could do a better job than what was happening so far in his, you know, in his academic career and within his education. So that was already playing on my mind. But then when he was in 5th grade, he was out running around with some friends, and he fell, and he was crying, not crying, but you know, kind of very visibly like in pain and upset, but not officially like bawling or anything like that. And so, you know, he told me, I fell and my leg hurts. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's sit down, let's put an ice pack on it. Because he wasn't like, I could tell he was in pain, but it wasn't like, you know, what you would expect if there was something very seriously wrong. So we had ice on it, and I think about 2 hours went by. Obviously, I was just checking on him and bringing him things, and, you know, going through whatever care I could as far as ice packs and Tylenol and things like that. But after 2 hours, again, he still wasn't crying, but he was like, no, it's just, it really hurts. And so we took him to the ER, and it turned out that he had fractured his leg. And I actually remember kind of joking with, not joking, but sort of talking to the nurse, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, he's not really crying or anything, so it's probably fine. It's, you know, it's probably nothing, but I would rather be safe than sorry. And so she's like, yeah, I mean, we see these cases all the time. So when the doctor came back and was like, no, actually, he is just a really tough guy, because I would be crying right now, but no, he broke it, and it's very broken. But there's also something else going on. So we're going to send you to a specialist. And, you know, and I'm like, of course, at that point, I'm like, can you tell me more? What's going on? And they weren't really willing to tell me a lot more, because I think I don't know if they just didn't want to scare me, or if they really weren't sure, but they didn't really get into it. So by the time I got to the specialist, it turned out that he had a benign tumor in his tibia, and the reason why his leg broke is because the tumor was taking up 92% of the bone. And so on the x-ray, it just looks like this huge, like the bone had just been eaten away, and the fracture went straight through it. And so he was just running around. He wasn't doing anything dangerous. He literally was just running. But because the tumor had eaten through so much of the bone, it couldn't support his weight anymore, so it just cracked. And so 5th grade, we were only, this happened right before my husband and I got married. And so this happened in October, just before Halloween in 2017. Now, he had to go in a cast, and he was on crutches. The bone doctor said that they had to heal the fracture before they could do the surgery to take out the tumor. So we had to wait from October until January before he could have the surgery. And then so he was on crutches and in a cast this whole time. And then he had this very massive surgery, and they had to do a bone graft and things like that. So then he was in a cast until like almost summertime, I think. And then even then he had to be in a boot. So it was a long recovery process. So once I went to the initial appointment and they told me your son is going to be in, a cast, and he's going to be, having surgery and recovery and these things, and it's going to take quite a while. His 5th grade was all in portables because they would have the kids change classes between the 4 core classes so that he could start preparing for what it would be like in middle school. So, and all of his classes were in portables. And portables, if you know anything about portables at school, they typically have stairs, and then it's manufactured like building. And they all have stairs. And they didn't have, which surprised me, they didn't have accommodations. And I'm like, what do you do if you have a student who's in a wheelchair or something? And they told me that it was going to take it would take time to modify the buildings to have accommodations, because he was on crutches and with, so they're like, the only accommodations we can do is have him leave class, like 5 minutes early to go to lunch, or, whatever, so that he, isn't trampled by all the other kids and things. And I thought to myself, man, every hour or so he'd be having to go up and down more stairs, between classes. And I was a little bit shocked that they didn't have more accommodations. And I also was surprised that this hadn't been an issue before. There's never been a 5th grader come through who was in a wheelchair or on crutches or had any sort of disability where they needed, a different system than what they had. And apparently not, because they weren't able to accommodate him. And so their solution was to have him do his schooling at home and have a teacher come out like once a week, I think, or something, and work with him for an hour individually and then give him assignments. And I was like, that doesn't sound like that's going to work at all. So our initial reason for pulling him, besides all the other things that I've already talked about, it was kind of a buildup, I guess. But it was that we were in a situation where they couldn't accommodate him being on crutches, and the fact that he was going to have surgeries and be laid up and for the whole school year and then some. And so I made the decision. I was looking at my options, and I decided to pull him and enroll him in an online charter school. And we went with Connections Academy. And because we came in the middle of the semester, they were very unsure on what things they were able to not have him make up or whatnot. And so he went into the school year very behind. I remember he had to work through his entire winter break just to get caught up with the way that the Connections Academy system goes. The teachers he had were decent. One in particular, this one teacher that he had was amazing. It was his primary teacher, luckily. That was amazing. But all the teachers there were good. But the model of how that online charter school system works was a little challenging. And I remember at the end of 5th grade, my son was like, please tell me that I can go back to school next year. I miss my friends. I've been laid up forever. Because at this point, remember, he couldn't go outside and play quite the same. A lot of his friends, are from our church, and they live, in neighborhoods that aren't super, I mean, they're close, but they're not right here where he can just walk out the door. And so he felt like socially he was missing out on some things, and especially because he was used to, public school and things, but also because he was back and forth to doctors and laid up with surgeries and all that, we didn't really have the ability to put him in sports or put him in, we were very limited on the things he was cleared, to do by his doctor. So that was a really hard year for him socially, and also academically, because learning online was a completely new thing, and trying to emulate public school in a home setting is, in my opinion, a challenge, and it's really hard. And I feel like that's what the online charter schools try to do. They try to have it be very similar to, school, public school. at home. And for some kids, I imagine that would work wonderfully. But for my son in particular, it was a lot of reading. It was a lot of, and his struggle with the vocabulary recall delay does affect his reading. And when he was in 5th grade, he still was struggling with it enough that having to just read, and then do online quizzes and stuff like that, it was really hard for him. So it wasn't working. So at the beginning of 6th grade, he wasn't on crutches at this point, if I remember correctly. He was still having to wear a support boot thing, but he could walk on it. But so I enrolled him in school, and I remember when I enrolled him in middle school, it was at the beginning of 6th grade, and they still had him do gym class, even though he wasn't cleared by his doctor to do anything in gym class. So he literally would just go there and sit, which I thought was a little frustrating, because it's like he could do an art class or do a completely different class instead of wasting his time watching everyone else do these sports, which honestly took a toll on him because he felt very left out. And the other kids, I don't want to say they made fun of him, but he would have kids who would kind of be like, you can't join us, so bye, kind of thing. And he felt very isolated because of that. And so that was disheartening also. But he really just, he didn't like it. He didn't like how fast-paced the transition times were. I think he had a total of 3 minutes to get from one class to the next class, and there was no time to use the restroom. He would come home, and the first thing he would do is run into the bathroom. Lunch was, I think they only have 15 minutes or something here, and I was just like, wow, like your whole day is just transitions and administration, taking attendance, and the amount of actual learning that was happening. I just felt like the whole system was not okay, or not what I wanted for his education. So we ended up, he was only in 6th grade in public school for a couple months, and I was like, you know what, he got to a point where he was so frustrated with it and things like that, that he was coming home and I would pick him up, and the first thing, he always looked miserable when I would pick him up from school. And I just remember it got to a point that every single day for 6th grade, which again, he was only in for 2 months, I think, he would get in my car after school, and he would look horrible, and I would ask him, how was your day? What's going on? And he would just tell me every day in the most sad voice, I hate school, I hate learning, I'm dumb, things like that, things along those lines, and just saying, I don't like school, why do I have to come here? Learning is stupid, comments like that. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is breaking my heart, because there's certain things that we as parents want our kids to get out of school. And if your kid is going to school every single day and they're coming home thinking that they're dumb, thinking that learning is dumb or stupid or whatever verbiage they use, or that school is not fun, or that they don't like it, kids are mean. He would get picked on for having, the boot on. Kids are cruel. I think that year he also had braces, so of course he got picked on for that. And no matter how much I would talk to the school, it's just, a lot of, okay, we'll talk to the kid, okay, we'll talk to their parent, but nothing ever really changed. I don't even know if they really did talk to the other parent or, whatnot. But, and then I remember they had him go into the dean's office to set up a meeting with one of the other kids that was picking on him to work things out or whatever, and that made things worse. So it was a lot, and it was heartbreaking to see him going through that, every single day. So I just, in my head one day, I had enough, and I said, you know what? I know I can do a better job than what is happening here. Your entire public school experience from K to now has been horrible, with the exception of a couple really good years in there. Like I said, his 2nd and 4th grade teachers, I think that was the only 2 years that he really seemed to thrive and do really well. I just had gotten to a point where I was fed up and where I had enough. And I had to really think about, what specifically do I want my son to be getting out of his education, and is he getting that? And the most important things to me as his mother that I want him to get is a love of learning self-confidence, and the ability to know how to learn and where to find information and how to fact check that information. And if your kids are not learning those base things, then whatever education system that they're part of, whether it be public school, private school, a charter school, even homeschool, if you're homeschooling your kid and they're not getting those things, then maybe it's not the right situation for them. I think that you need to really focus on what do you want your child to get from their education and where can they get that in the best way possible. And so, with that, I went forward and I decided that I wanted to teach my son. I knew that even though I know I don't have every bit of information that my son will ever need to know, and that was a worry of mine in the beginning, I have learned that nobody has every bit of information that they're ever going to need to know. But there are so many resources out there for you to find that information, and there are so many amazing curriculum choices and resources and materials. And if you really just search for, those things and really get to know your child and how they learn, what their learning style is, you can put together a curriculum that is going to teach them everything that they need to know. So since beginning our journey with homeschooling, which officially began in a couple months into 6th grade, I have some things that have led me to a place where none of my toddler or any future kids that I may have, they will all be homeschooled for these reasons. First of all, I like the teacher-to-student ratio. I like the one-on-one, even though I've got the preschool, or when Dean gets older, if he has a sibling that I'm also teaching, the ratio is still one-on-one or 1-to-2 or very small. I like that I can tailor their curriculum and tailor, their education and learning to their particular learning style. I also like that I can incorporate interest-led learning, so I can go with their interests and their passions and teach to those, which I think really helps a child to start to learn the things that they're passionate about, allowing them to experience different things, and then when they find something that they're interested in, really delving deep into that and going in those directions. I think that's an amazing way to learn, so that when your kids get to the high school time, when they're starting to have to think about what career path they want to go on or what they want to do in their future, they at least are starting to have some sort of an idea of what they like, what they don't like, and things like that, so it can sort of help start to narrow that down. So by the time they get to graduation, they at least have some sort of an idea of, do I want to go to college? Do I need to go to trade school? Do I need to be an apprentice? What do I want to do with my life? I also really like that there's less wasted time. It's more efficient to homeschool. In any school setting, whether it be public, private, charter, or any of those, there's a lot of time wasted for, like I was talking about earlier, the administration part of it and transitions. So when you first get into class, your class might be 40 minutes long, but you're going to spend 5 to 10 minutes doing attendance and turning in assignments that you had already done, and things like that. And really, once you hone it down, there's maybe 15 to 20 minutes of actual teaching before you start wrapping things up and moving on to your next class. And so with homeschool, you don't have all that, and you can tailor their learning. If you aren't quite done with something, then you take more time on it. If you finish early, then you can move on to something else, and there's really no wasted time. I also like that you can choose what sort of grading scale you're going to go off of. For us, we use a mastery grading scale, and the reason why we do that, and the reason why I like that, is basically my son will be working on something, and we will keep working on it until he gets it and he knows it and he's confident with it, and then we'll move on to the next thing. So by the time he finishes a book or a subject or a main lesson block, or a unit study, or whatever, whatever you want to call it, I know that he has a good understanding of that subject. and we grade accordingly. We grade as far as the effort is the primary thing. What effort are you putting into it? What, attitude are you having? Are you at least, trying hard and trying to stay positive? That doesn't mean you have to be positive every minute of every day, because of course that's never going to happen. But I grade according to, how hard he tries to, to get through it and to do the work. I also like homeschooling because it allows me to know what my kids are learning, and knowing that they're not going to be exposed to things that I'm not necessarily okay with, and knowing that their education is teaching them things that I agree that they should be learning. So and also not teaching things that I think are absolutely unnecessary. So I think a lot of the things that our kids learn in school, how many times have you said in your life, when am I ever going to use that again? kind of thing. So, obviously there are things that he'll need to know for SATs and ACTs, and things like that. And some of those things are in fact things that I question, like, when other than that is he going to need to know this? But, it is nice to have the ability to, teach him the things that I know he needs to know, and kind of maybe skimming over some of the things that I completely think are unnecessary. I also, in line with that, and my kids learning things that I'm okay with, I do want to share a little story from my experience, actually two things, that sort of inspired that thought. So I remember when I was in 9th grade, my Algebra 1 teacher didn't want to be a teacher anymore, and she actually was going to school to be a bartender. And I remember, we learned some math, but most of what we learned in her class was like quizzing her on different compositions on how to make drinks. And, we had a lot of time that I just remember being able to sit on your desk and just talk to your friends, or, be on your phone, or do whatever you wanted to do. And I just, that was, at the time, it was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But then, the following year I did geometry, which was fine. But then the year after that, when I went into Algebra 2, I got there and I knew nothing. And I was very frustrated because I had learned very little, if anything, really, in Algebra 1. And so now as an adult, in my teaching my 15-year-old, a lot of it is new to me. Thankfully, I'm learning it now along with him, which is fun. But I mean, that's just an experience that, is something that I would not be okay with my kid being in a classroom not learning a whole lot about the subject that they're supposed to be learning, but instead learning about how to mix alcoholic beverages. That is just one example. And then another thing that I wouldn't want my kids to be exposed to that I experienced is, I remember in my elementary school, there was a 5th grade teacher that was notorious for chucking, when he'd be done writing on the chalkboard, shows my age, writing on the chalkboard, if a kid was talking, he would chuck the chalk, at them. Or if you got caught chewing gum, one of the classes I was in, you would have to put the gum on your nose, and goodness gracious, if you happened to be chewing Big Red, which you put that on your nose, you're gonna have literally a pink burn on your nose from that. So it's just different experiences like that. I like knowing what my kids are learning, and knowing the environment that they're in is safe and nothing bad is going to happen to them. They're not going to be traumatized in any way. You also hear stories on the news all the time. I just recently heard about a bus driver who was taking, I think, 40 students home, who was drunk driving, and all the kids were like telling her to stop, and when she finally did, they were like escaping out the back because she was drunk and she was running over things, and that's terrifying. And I also heard a story about a principal, I believe in Florida or something, paddling a child. So I mean, it's just things like that are terrifying to me as a parent, and things I would never be okay with. And so I'm glad that with my kids being home with me, I know what they're exposed to, and I don't have to worry about, you know, any of those horrible things happening to my kids here. There's enough things that can happen in our lives. We don't need the added, possibilities of more horrible things to happen. So those are the reasons that I chose homeschooling. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you have any questions or comments or anything that you want to know more about or want me to elaborate on or anything, please feel free to share those in the comment section below. And we will see you next time. Bye.